meeting for April 21st, 2020. This is a virtual meeting. We have city staff and myself here at City Hall with other council members on video. And just remember, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of Earth Day tomorrow on Wednesday, April 22nd. More on that later. Item number 1, if we could call the roll, Mr. Reynolds.
Councilwoman Brennan.
Here.
Councilwoman Contreras.
Here.
Councilman Whiting.
Here.
Councilman Lehman.
Here.
And Mayor Mars.
Here. Thank you all. Item number 2, let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all.
Next item, approval of the agenda. Are there any changes, corrections, Mr. Reynolds?
Nothing from staff, sir.
Okay. Councilors?
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Councilor Lehman, Councilor Brennan as a second. Further discussion? Discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye, or by roll call. Mr. Reynolds?
Councilor Brennan.
Aye.
Councilor Contreras.
Aye.
Councilor Whiting.
Aye.
Councilor Lehman.
Aye.
And Mayor Mars.
Aye. The agenda has been approved. Moving ahead to consent agenda, item number 4. Are there any changes, Mr. Reynolds?
Not from staff, sir.
Councilors, state your name. Councilor Lehman?
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Lehman, 4C4.
Okay, 4C4. Others? Councilors? Councilor Lehman?
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as modified.
I'll second.
I have a
Brennan.
motion by Councilor Lehman and a second by Councilor Brennan. Before we would vote then, we would read the modified consent agenda into the public record. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. These are the consent agenda items for April 21st of 2020. 4A1 approves the minutes from the April 7th, 2020 meeting. 4B1 adopts resolution number R2020-TAC051, which sets a public hearing date to consider the vacation of public drainage and utility easements as dedicated when within Lot 1, Block 1, Outlot B, Canterbury Park, 7th edition, located along Shenandoah Drive and Barronshire within the Canterbury Park development. 4B2 adopts resolution number R2020-TAC052, which sets a public hearing date to consider the vacation of public drainage and utility easements as dedicated within Lot 1, Block 1, Friendship Church, located at the northwest corner of CSAH 78 and west of Marystown Road. 4C1 adopts resolution number R2020-TAC043, which accepts work on the 2019 pavement mill and overlay project, which is CIF TAC19-TAC002, and authorizes final payment in the amount of $23,672.46. 4C2 approves a drainage and utility encroachment agreement for 1301 Meadow Court. 4C3 adopts resolution number R2020-TAC054, which awards a contract in the amount of $788,870.76 to Ryan Contracting Company for the Reroute Stormwater to Protect Historic Sites Project, which is Storm TAC 19-TAC003. And 4C5 authorizes the execution of a professional services agreement with SRF Consulting Group Incorporated for construction services in the amount of $688,167 for the Unbridled Avenue project, which is CIF TAC 20 TAC 014.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I have a motion and a second for the modified consent agenda. It's been read into the public record. There would be no further discussion by voice vote. Mr. Reynolds.
Counselor Brennan.
Aye.
Counselor Contreras.
Aye.
Counselor Whiting.
Aye.
Counselor Lehman.
Aye.
Mayor Mars.
Aye. The modified consent agenda has been approved. Thank you. Item number 5, recognition of involved citizens. For any citizen that would like to come forward and make a comment on an item not on the agenda, I think residents were instructed to send in their questions in advance. And looking at staff, is there anything come in yet?
No, sir.
Okay. Seeing none then, for item number 5, we would move ahead to item number 6, business removed from consent. And we had an item 4C4, award a contract for the Unbridled Avenue project. Counselor Lehman, you had some questions?
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Lehman. The couple of questions. First is the cost of this is $6.8 million for roughly a mile of road. Seems pretty expensive. Granted, I know it has sewer and all the other stuff in it, but it's still very expensive. I have a couple of concerns about this whole project that I wanted that opportunity to vote against it.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor,
yes,
this is Counselor Whiting. I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution R 2020 TAC 053, awarding a contract in the amount of $6,212,461.82 to Geislinger and Sons Incorporated for the 12th Avenue Reconstruction Project, CIF 20 TAC 014.
Mr. Mars, this is Counselor Contreras. I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Counselor Lehman?
Mr. Mars, it says Unbridled Avenue, not 12th Avenue.
This is for Unbridled.
Yeah, that looks like an error in the memo. So that should be Unbridled as opposed to 12th Avenue.
All right,
Mr.
thank you for that.
Counselor Whiting.
Motion maker Whiting?
I would like to amend my motion and take out the 12th Avenue Reconstruction Project and put in the word Unbridled Avenue.
Okay, and
Second.
is that a friendly amendment to the second? Second approve
Correct.
that?
Yes.
All right, very well. Thank you for that. Further discussion? Further discussion? Discussion by voice vote. Mr. Reynolds.
Counselor Brennan.
Aye.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear Counselor Brennan. Thank you. Counselor Contreras.
Aye.
Counselor Whiting.
Aye.
Counselor Lehman.
Negative.
And Mayor Mars.
Aye. Motion passes 4-1 for the contract approval of Unbridled Avenue. And thank you all for that. We will move ahead then, and I would entertain a motion to stand in recess for our Economic Development Authority. Counselor Lehman.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to recess to the EDA meeting.
Second.
I have a motion by Counselor Contreras as a second. Further discussion? 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 By voice vote, Mr. Reynolds?
Counselor Brennan.
Aye.
Counselor Contreras.
Aye.
Counselor Whiting.
Aye.
Counselor Lehman.
Aye.
And Mayor Mars.
Aye. We will stand in recess for the EDA. Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll call to order the Shakopee Economic Development Authority for April 21st, 2020. Mr. Reynolds, can you please make note of the roll, or do we need to call that?
I have the roll. We're good.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to number 3, consent business. Mr. Lehman?
Mr. President, how about if we approve the agenda first?
Oh,
I'll make a
sorry,
motion to approve the agenda.
A motion by Lehman, seconded by Brennan. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Oh, by roll call, sorry. Let's start with Councilor Reyes.
Mr. President,
Aye.
Roll call,
Mr. President, would you like me to conduct roll call?
please.
Thank you. Ms. Brennan,
Aye.
Ms. Contreras,
Aye.
Mr. Whiting,
Aye.
Mr. Lehman,
Aye.
Mr. Mars.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 3, consent business now. We have a motion for the consent agenda.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda. That's Brown.
Second by Contreras.
Motion by Brennan, seconded by Contreras. Mr. Reynolds, will you please take the roll?
Yes, sir, Mr. President. Ms. Brennan,
Aye.
Ms. Contreras,
Aye.
President Whiting,
Aye.
Mr. Lehman,
Aye.
Mr. Mars.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll move on to general business. Item number 4A is a resolution to modify the Sanmar district. Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. President. Here is Mr. Kursky.
Good evening, President and board members. I have a presentation that should cover all of these items, if that's okay with you, Mr. President.
Please go ahead.
So this is the current project site that we have. You can see right now, this is just when Shenandoah is being built, but we have the Triple Crown Phase 1, Triple Crown Phase 2, a development project that's going to the Planning Commission called the Southwest Development, and then up in the upper right-hand corner is the property that was owned by J&J Minneapolis. That's the Sanmar parcel. TCO is the Twin City Outboard that was acquired by Canterbury, and then there's a piece owned by the county. So the piece that will be brought in, taken out of the Sanmar district, is the parcel that's in red. Last year you held a public hearing on all these properties. Tonight you'll be actually passing the necessary motions to remove this parcel now that it is in the city's ownership, and then bring in the other 3 parcels below it. One owned by the county, one's the Crane Company, and then the site currently owned by Canterbury that was formerly TC Outboard. Go ahead. So the Canterbury district will now include that section. So by doing that, it allows the funds that we'll be spending for the acquisition of the J&J property and the construction for Unbridled to be included as part of the TIF district.
Is there a way we can move the pictures of all of us over so we can see the map that you're talking about?
Mr. Lehman, if you click on the bar for the stack, you can drag it over to wherever you like.
Okay, thank you.
So board members, Mr. President, this will be the new Canterbury district based on actions that will be taken by the EDA and then later by the city council. And then these are the road projects. We'll see in a second the budget, but the blue phase 3 is what was approved tonight by the city council. That's Unbridled. And the flexible number are the internal roads that Canterbury will be responsible for building at a later date. We've already completed phase 1, which was Shenandoah. They're doing the finished work on that this summer. Phase 2 was 12th Avenue, and phase kind of 2A of that will be completed with County Highway 83 project in 2021. And then the rest of them are improvements that will occur over time. Next. So here's the budget. The preliminary costs that were in the original TIF are on the left side, and you can see we've made some changes. The biggest change is we moved Unbridled over to the city side on the TIF side, so that will be funded by a tax increment bond. There's adequate TIF revenue coming in that we can pay both the bond that was passed for Shenandoah and also the bonds that will be issued for Unbridled, formerly known as Barrenshire. And then the rest of the kind of what we'll call the waterfall of money. So the city gets first rights on any of the TIF revenue. Canterbury gets the money after that. So we have debt coverage ratios that are required by our bondholders. So until we reach that amount, Canterbury would not receive any of the incremental revenue from the project. Once more projects come online and there's additional TIF revenue, some of that money will then fall to them. But right now, basically, they're out of pocket on the Shenandoah Drive construction for $8.6 million, and then Howard Trail and Shenyan, they will have to wait. They're accruing interest on that, but they will not receive any payment until there's adequate TIF funding, since the city has a priority. Questions?
Mr. President, I have a couple questions.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Kursky, in regard to the Sandmar District, number 14, that we're moving a parcel, is that district complete, or is it still ongoing, and the effect of the property is just vacant land wouldn't have a negative effect on the Sandmar District, right?
Mr. President, board members, no. So that property in the original contract was set aside for potential for an addition to the Sandmar. They have never done that, so they're only accruing right now the TIF revenue off their existing building. Right. And that's an economic development TIF that was 9 years, so that'll be coming off in the next few years.
Right, okay. And then, as you mentioned, in regard to the follow-up question, Mr. President, in regard to what we would see is the bonding for this project, that the current developments within the Canterbury TIF district have enough value, or will have enough value once completed, to carry the repayment of the TIF dollars to the city for the bonds?
Mr. President, board members, that's correct. So the TIF revenue from the Triple Crown project, the first phase, that project actually has come in higher than we had anticipated in the original TIF run. So that's generating a significant amount of revenue. They are coming in right now for permits to do the footing and foundation work for the second phase. That has to be done before they can really occupy the first phase because of blasting and other utility work. And then there are a number of projects that the Planning Commission will be looking at their May meeting. At least one of them will start construction this year because they're actually coming in for a PUD amendment for that building, which council and we'll see.
Okay. Mr. President, one more follow-up question in regard to the positioning of TIF dollars for this project. You have mentioned in your memos that we stand, as far as 12th Avenue bonds and unbridled bonds, that we would be in the very first position to get paid from any TIF dollars first, right?
Mr. President, board members, that's correct. So any TIF revenue that comes in, we have bond covenants that require a debt coverage ratio. So whatever that ratio is, we have to retain those earnings to make sure that we keep that amount of money on hand, plus pay the bondholders. So any money that comes after that would then flow to Canterbury. But for right now, it's basically all coming to the city.
Right. We're pretty protected on that. Mr. President, thank you. That's all.
All right, any further questions? Any other questions?
Mr. President?
Mr. Lehman?
Yeah, my questions, the county costs that are shown in this chart, per their memo of putting out their capital improvement plan, putting it out for a while because of the economic situation that we're in. Are any of their projects in this affected by that decision?
Mr. President and board members, I do not believe so. County Highway 83 is probably at 90%. There's a large share of federal dollars in that project, and we need to get Unbridled built because that will be the detour. That's in their current CIP and is already more or less underway. They're doing their final property acquisition. But Mr. Lillehog might be able to chime in and shed some additional light if possible. Still there?
Mr. Lillard, we can't hear you. It sounds like he doesn't have anything to add. Mr. Kursky?
Yes, sir.
Well, we have this in front of us. What's the decision of the council?
Okay. Mr.
Layman,
President,
go ahead.
can I follow up? The next question I have is, so we're gonna have $16 million into this, and what we know, we're going into an economic downturn. We don't know how severe or for how long. What's now that this agreement has been changed, so instead of the Canterbury taking out the loan and getting reimbursed from the TIF, the city's gonna take on debt basically. And if it goes sideways, the taxpayers are gonna have to pay for it. So how do we figure out what an economic downturn does? What's the worst case scenario, I guess, is I'm asking.
Mr. President and board members, not only do we have the TIF revenue coming in, but there's also an assessment agreement that Canterbury executed so that if the revenues were to fall short on the bonds, they have basically an assessment against their property, including the track, that basically would cover any payments.
Any follow-up, Mr. Layman?
Well, Mr. President, my concern is that we know they're not gonna be open until at least June. I don't know about what's after that. Uncharted times, don't you know? And I'm concerned that what's happening, they may not be able to, and we're gonna have to carry it, and then we're gonna have to pay for it for a while. And that's a big chunk of money.
Well, Mr. President and board members, we're paying for it now because there's property taxes due on the new developments, so it has nothing to do with what happens to Canterbury. It has to do with the Triple Crown and other development that's occurring there. And despite the recession or whatever you want to call it, that we're potentially going into, there are projects coming forward right now and coming in for permits. So this is a good time for companies that are solid to be borrowing money, as is the same is true for the city. These are very good times to be bonding a project at very low rates. The private sector, unfortunately, is not benefiting necessarily from those low rates that we are.
But that works as long as these projects are successful, instead of having the situation turn to where they're unsuccessful. If you have an apartment building, luxury apartment building, and you can't fill it up, you don't have that revenue, and that makes that development in trouble. So let's hope for the best, I guess.
My opinion on that is that the taxes will be paid because they're not going to allow that kind of property to go into a foreclosure. And at that point, the city's still protected by the clauses in the contract. This is a great time to borrow money. I do understand your concern, and I appreciate that. But this is also a portion of the road that we need to further allow for Canterbury to have the detour part of it. And that, like you said, was federal money, and I don't think they're going to be giving that back. Any further comments on this?
Mr. President,
Go ahead, Mr. Morris.
I understand the concerns here, but I also feel, looking at the numbers, that we're going to have about $12 million out in bonds. And given the current level of development in the area on the west side, I believe those will be enough to carry the day over the term for this. And if there was a recession and those values go down a little bit, I still think there's enough value for those. As Mr. Kursky mentioned, the current values are coming in higher than we even projected a year ago, and that some of those buildings, the building's not even open yet. But a watchful eye on this, and I think that's important, and that is my comment.
Any other comments from council?
Mr. President,
Go ahead, Ms. Brennan.
I would like to make a motion to approve the removal of parcel from tax increment financing district number 14 with the Minnesota River Valley Housing and Redevelopment Project number 1.
Second, Mr. President, Council Contreras.
We have a motion by Brennan, second by Contreras. And Mr. Lehman, you have a comment?
I have a question, just thought of it. By removing the parcel from Sandmar's TIF district over to Canterbury's TIF district, does that devalue the valuation of the Sandmar TIF district? And
Mr.
where are
President,
we in the Sandmar TIF district? That was 9 years, I believe. How many years left on that? And what does that loss of that value of that land to that district do?
Mr. Kursky?
Hi, thank you. City
Tom
Go ahead,
Dunaway
Mr.
from
Dunaway.
Baker Tilly is on.
My name is Tom Dunaway. I'm with Baker Tilly. I've been, with the city's financial advisor. We've worked on both the original Sandmar project as well as the current Canterbury modification. And as it relates to Sandmar, there is a little bit of value above the base value that's being generated by the parcel that was removed, which is why we had to go through the public hearing process to remove it. If the value was less than the base value for that parcel and it was creating a negative drag, you wouldn't require a public hearing to remove it. So there was a slight amount of increment that would have been getting generated by that property. That being said, because it is a pay-as-you-go note, the developer is still only obligated to receive the revenue that's being generated by the property. So while it would slightly reduce the amount of annual revenue going to the project, it won't materially impact the repayment of the pay-go note, which has a final year based on pay 2025 for the full, nope, that's RAR, sorry. So it likely won't affect the repayment schedule of the TIF district. But let me pull up the exact TIF report here. More importantly, from the city's perspective, is the fact that the value on that property did increase over the base value, is it'll actually add a small amount of base value to the city's overall taxable market value as a whole. Because that value had gone up for that parcel slightly from what the base value was, you'll see a slight increase as it relates to that. So it looks like the final payment is in 2024 from, I think, 2023 increment. And looking at the outstanding principal balance, I think it'll take the full term of the note to repay. So it really won't be changing the overall duration of the district any.
Mr. President and board members, our goal is once that road is built, there'll be a remnant parcel to work with J&J Minneapolis, which is the parent company that owns that site, to see whether they are interested in buying back any of the remnant parcels that can redevelop the rest of their site. And that would be outside of the existing TIF.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Lehman?
Did I hear him say that parcel would be outside of any TIF?
Mr. President, board member, no, it'll be outside. So when if we were to sell that remnant back to Sandmar, it would not be in the Sandmar TIF anymore. And it would
Okay,
just be,
so
it's
it
to
wouldn't be
provide,
any-
it's to provide access to the rest of their site. When we went through the eminent domain that council approved to acquire that property, one of the agreements was that we're actually putting a driveway so they get a second means of access to that property because it's currently landlocked.
Okay.
Any further questions or comments? We have a motion on the floor. Mr. Kursky or Mr. Reynolds, would you please take the roll?
Yes, sir, Mr. President. Ms. Brennan.
Oh, I think we have to vote on that first. We have a motion and second. So, yeah, go ahead, please.
Ms. Brennan.
Aye.
Ms. Contreras.
Aye.
President Whiting.
Aye.
Mr. Lehman.
Nay.
Mr. Mars.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries 4-1 with Mr. Lehman in dissent. We'll move on to item 4B, amend the Canterbury Redevelopment TIF District. Mr. Kursky.
Mr. President,
Mr. Mars.
this has been covered. This talks about the agreement for Unbridled and getting our city into the #1 position on the dollars of the tax TIF district to pay us back. I believe that is correct. The next one? Oh, I apologize.
This is the resolution approving a modification of the tax instrument financing plan for the TIF District Number 18. This was covered by Mr. Kursky as part of his presentation.
So it's been covered. Now we need a
No, I apologize. I misspoke, but these 3 items have been covered. And Mr. President, if you would allow me, I would make a motion to approve Resolution E 2020-001, approving a modification of the tax district increment financing plan for tax increment financing district number 18.
Brennan seconds.
We have a motion by Mars, second by Brennan. Any further comments? Please take the roll.
Ms. Brennan.
Aye.
Ms. Contreras.
Aye.
President Whiting.
Aye.
Mr. Lehman.
Negative.
Mr. Mars.
Aye.
Motion carries 4-1 with Mr. Lehman in dissent. We will move on to item 4C, amend the contract for private development with Canterbury Commons and Canterbury Park.
Mr. President, this is the one I'm take value in because this is the one that talks about putting the city in the first position in regard to those costs, to be first in line to get paid back from the value of that district. So with that, I'll offer a motion to approve Resolution E 2020-2, approving and amending to the contract for private development with the Economic Development Authority for the City of Shakopee, Minnesota, Canterbury Development LLC, and Canterbury Park Holding Corporation.
Second by Contreras.
Motion by Mars, second by Contreras. Any further comments or questions? Mr. Reynolds.
Ms. Brennan.
Aye.
Ms. Contreras.
Aye.
President Whiting.
Aye.
Mr. Lehman.
Thank you. I had my hand up for a question that was missed.
I'm sorry, missed that.
I just wanted to, this is also the agreement that changes and puts the city first, but it also puts the debt onto the city instead of the developer at the exposure of the taxpayers if this goes sideways. I understand that there's enough TIF in some people's opinions, but it's too risky for me and I vote against it. Thank you.
And Mr. Mars.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1 with Mr. Lehman in dissent. Next item is item 5.
President, I make a motion to adjourn to May 5th, 2020 at 7:00 p.m.
Second.
We have a motion by Brennan and a second by Contreras to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Or
Aye.
take the roll.
Ms. Brennan.
Aye.
Ms. Contreras.
Aye.
President Whiting.
Aye.
Mr. Lehman.
Aye.
Mr. Mars.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll reconvene the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for April 21st, 2020. We have just completed our EDA meeting. And we are at 9A1, monthly financial review. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mayor Mars and members of council. Nate and I are going to basically talk a little bit, we're going to talk more about COVID and its impacts on where we are today, more than the financial review. As you know, this being March, or the March financial review before us, there's a lot of stuff that we really don't see yet because we haven't really been too far into the budget process. We believe our time is better spent when talking about COVID in general. So essentially, as I've stated before, I've been in contact with other administrators and managers throughout the metro area, sometimes on a 3 or 4 times a week in conference calls as we talk about some of these financial issues that are affecting all of us. We're starting to see a pattern amongst all of the organizations, and I'll be giving more information on that in a future meeting. But as far as planning is concerned, the meeting that we had this morning, we were taking a look at what the possible impact could be on property taxes. And essentially, we started looking at and analyzing that we were probably looking at a 3 to 5% impact of property taxes coming up in the next year. So that is, again, we're dealing with 50, 60 days at this point, not even that. So it is very preliminary, but I just wanted all of you to know that we are in the process of taking a hard look at this stuff for the future, making sure that we're putting plans in place to be able to handle it. We are in the best position that a city could possibly be in when it comes to where we are financially and in regards to the tools that we have available to us to address COVID-19. We have made some steps that Nate's going to talk about in a few minutes, but we also have a big toolbox. And there are a lot of steps that we can take in the future to address some of these issues. We will make decisions based upon data. We will ensure that what we do is we understand what the long-term effects of those decisions are, and we're certainly not going to rush into anything. As I said before, in talking with other managers and administrators in the metro area, there are some that have already decided that they're not going to do recreational programming this summer. They've already called that off. That certainly is a tool or something that we can look at if we need to. And there are other options available as well. So I just kind of wanted to give you a general overview. I'm very optimistic at this point, as optimistic as we possibly can be. We have a lot going for us as a community financially. We're very financially strong. And frankly, we've got the policies in place that allowed us to be able to weather this. And with that being said, Nate's going to kind of run through what we have at this point and kind of what our general ledger looks like when it comes to COVID.
Thank you. Nate?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Again, Nate Reinhardt, Finance Director for the City of Shakopee. If you want to move on to the next slide. Thanks for the introduction. The city has set up separate tracking codes for invoices and timesheets to help us assist in identifying costs related to COVID-19. We believe that it is too early to provide an accurate estimate of the potential financial impacts, but tracking and reviewing on an ongoing basis will allow us to make more informed financial decisions and potentially allow us to request reimbursement funds if they become available from either the state or federal government. The data on this page is what has been coded to those tracking codes through March 31st. We have identified approximately 90,000 through the end of March, with about 48,000 for refunds issued for March and April for the community center, ice arena, and recreational programming. About 28,000 for paid leave for those unable to come to work or work from home, and 14,000 for personal costs related to COVID-19, such as planning and coordinating. One consideration with the personal cost is some of these costs would have occurred with COVID-19 or without, the exception being they're working on COVID-19 related activities as opposed to normal work responsibilities. The city has implemented a number of steps to help mitigate the financial impacts from COVID-19. That includes the city manager approval of hiring any open positions, reductions in part-time hours, and maintenance and energy savings in unused building spaces. Examples being the emptying of the swimming pool at the community center, and then reducing the ice thickness of the ice arena down to the bare minimum, so reducing energy cost that way. There are also some other potential savings as a sort of a side effect, including fuel savings and potential for construction savings. We have seen with some of our recent construction bids, with some of our recent construction bids that they've come in below the engineer's estimates. So I think at the end of April, we can start identifying some of those offsetting costs and really determine the net impact. We do have liquidity and sufficient cash flows to supplement the loss of revenue during this period. One of the things we have been doing is as investments mature, we've been holding those for operational purposes rather than investing them in more long-term investments. On the next slide, we've also started to review revenues, which will continue to monitor their financial impacts. Again, this analysis is through March 31st. Through the first quarter of 2020, we are seeing a year-over-year increase in the number of building permits from 315 up to 458, as well as new single-family housing starts from 31 to 40. And specifically with the number of building permits, we're seeing a lot of residential improvement projects. In 2019, we had 2 significantly larger building permit revenues in the first quarter. If we adjust for those 2 unusually large permits, our building permit revenue is actually up from what we've seen in the past 2 years. Again, this is just through March 31st, but it's at least a good sign for the first quarter. Park and recreation revenues are down approximately $149,000 from 2019 through March. March revenues do include the $48,000 of refunds that were processed on the first slide. And then March did include, or did not include any adjustment to the allocation of membership revenue. So we've typically took a annual membership and spread it out over a 12-month period, which we've done for March, but we do not intend on doing with the April allocation. And then we're also, there's also some outstanding revenues left that we expect to receive for the ice arena in April. We do anticipate seeing a reduction in lodging tax revenue and potentially seeing an impact on sanitary sewer revenue as usage patterns may change. For lodging tax, the city serves as the pass-through to the Visitors Bureau. The city itself only retains 5%. But as of this morning, the city had collected $15,000 for March with one delinquent payment. This compares to $30,000 last year, so about half as much as the same month last year. And lastly, looking into the future, we might have potential impacts in terms of property tax collections, market value impacts, investment income, and an impact on the cost of issuing debt, whether beneficial or negative. And as City Manager or City Administrator Reynolds mentioned, I do believe we're in a better position than most cities, specifically those cities that may rely on sales tax or similar revenue types. Our financial policies and reserves, I think, puts us in a very strong position to handle the COVID-19 crisis. There isn't necessarily a manual for us to follow, but the information being provided will continue to be refined and as we move forward. And then by tracking and identifying these financial impacts, it allows us to be a little more proactive with our decision-making as we move forward. With that, I can stand for any questions.
Thanks, Nate. Questions of council members?
I have a question.
Counselor, go ahead.
Matt Lehman, in the memo, second page, last paragraph, it talks about the city utilizing security and asset management, and apparently we're going to take $6 million in certificates of deposit previously held by our asset management company and manage it ourselves.
Yes, so Councilmember Lehman's referring to within the financial report, we have a quarterly investment report, and that is correct. So we've moved those funds under city direction versus it being managed by a money manager, which, one of the thoughts behind that is CDs are relatively straightforward to to handle as a finance director. And it eliminates that additional, I guess, management fee on top of those investments.
Follow-up question?
Yes, go ahead.
So instead of seeing them dollars in our financial report from our advisor, Securian, where will we see that $6 million investment?
So we plan on having them continue to provide reporting on both those funds. So they'll continue to be provided in the quarterly report. It's just where it says, I wish I had it in front of me, but where the two portfolios are separated within that investment report, the first one will be managed by the city, so by the finance director, and the second one will be provided by Securian, but they'll still both be provided within that report.
Okay,
Switching to it being a little more liquid and house control for the short term. Is that correct?
Yes, what it ends up doing really is it ends up allowing me to ladder, now you're getting me into the investment side of things, but it allows me to ladder the funds a little more proactively so that the maturities kind of match what we need them to match in terms of cash flow, and they're very straightforward buying a certificate.
Good. Other questions of council members? I guess I had a couple. I have, so this report is dated for March 31st, which with the situation of COVID-19 beginning in earnest in March, mid-March, this is only a very small snapshot. If we're gonna do this quarterly, we're not gonna see this for a couple more months. Would we see I mean, all of April would be impacted, even though April's not over. That would give us a more fuller run rate, at least, and maybe we could see that down the line in early May. Mr. Reynolds?
Well, it's my intent to continue to bring forward COVID-19 statistical data for council. And so it won't be quarterly. It needs to be monthly. So as part of our monthly analysis that we bring forward to you, you're very right. We're essentially looking at 2.5 weeks of impact
Right.
in this particular report. So April's not going to be good either. So
Right, no, and the numbers will be bigger, so that's actually why I brought up that question, to make sure that we're looking at this, when we see the next update on this, the numbers will be more large to reflect a full month of full impact, so. Other questions?
I just have a comment
Counselor Brennan?
that the building permit fees are great, and hopefully that we'll continue to see that high amount and increase.
you know, one of the benefits of where we are right now, and we've seen it at the city just in our projects, now's the time to build if you can. And, you know, there are some organizations that are capitalized enough to be able to make that happen at this point. If this is a steep but short recession, you know, that will work out okay. I mean, obviously, as a longer recessionary activity kicks in and the longer impact it has, you know, and we don't know what that's going to be, but those are the things that will ultimately impact if those fees continue to come in. But as it stands now, our building fees continue to be very strong.
Other questions of staff? Counselor Whiting?
Thank you. You know, during this discussion, it brought up a concern I have. We talked about the hospitality tax and concern over the CVB, and that's a major portion of their financial base. So what can we expect from them? Has there been discussions with them?
Counselor Whiting, I have not had discussions with I actually owe the director a phone call. She called me this morning and I did not get back to her today, but I certainly can ask about that and ask what their prospects are and what they're looking at for their impact. There will be clearly a major hit to those funds, and you know, until we can freely move about the city and the state, those funds will continue to be hit.
Right, it's a concern. Another follow-up, please, not to do with the financial portion, but I know we brought back Public Works folks. And I want to make sure we're doing all the proper training and maybe changing up shifts and keeping people separated as much as we can with all the COVID policies that are out there. Can you address that a little bit, please?
Yeah, absolutely, and we really have, we're going to the point of where people are not in the same vehicle, they're driving to work sites separately, they're not eating together, they're eating in different spaces, and obviously they have the responsibility to remain 6 feet apart at every point during the workday. Mr. Lillyhog has worked very hard to instill in his people the responsibility for that, but we did recognize that when the governor opened up outdoor activities, especially landscaping type activities, that it was time to bring our Public Works people fully back. Steve, do you want to address anything more on that? We can't hear you. Sorry.
Okay, he's okay.
Mayor,
Counselor Lehman.
the comment I would want to point out is the impacts are not only to government and the hotel industry and stuff, but it's to households and businesses. And we need to figure out how not to be a secondary impact on these households and businesses, as these are our constituents. So we got to keep in mind that we roll forward here, not knowing how long it's going to be and how bad it could be, that our constituents are getting impacted too. Households are hurting, and so are businesses. So we need to keep that in the back of our mind as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Councilor Lehman. It certainly is in our minds. One of the big problems that we have is that we have no control over the situation. And we clearly need to get people back to work. And, you know, it's that balancing act that the governor is making currently. But as long as people are staying home and don't have the opportunity to work, it is having a severe impact upon our populace, and we certainly do recognize that.
Anything else for our monthly financial review of COVID-19? Seeing none then, Nate, thank you very much. Mr. Reynolds, thank you for that update. Look forward to the next one. Moving ahead then to planning and development, a series of 3 items that were actually identical to the EDA. 9B1, resolution to modify the Sandmar district.
Mr. Mayor, this is Councilor Whiting.
Councilor Whiting.
Thank you. This is a mirror to our EDA proposals. So I'll offer resolution to approve resolution number R2020-05 to approve the removal of parcels from.
Just 1 minute.
Councilor Whiting, we lost you. Can you?
Oh, I will restate if you've got me now.
Okay, so you need to speak into the mic, sir.
I will offer resolution number
Thank you.
R2020-058 to approve the removal of parcel from tax increment finance district number 14 with the Minnesota Valley Housing and Redevelopment Project number 1.
Brennan seconds.
I have a motion by Councilor Whiting, a second by Councilor Brennan. This is to move a piece of parcel from one district to another, from 14 to 1. This went through the EDA. Motion on the table and a second. Further discussion? Further discussion? Discussion, and by voice vote, Mr. Reynolds.
Councilor Brennan.
Aye.
Councilor Contreras.
Aye.
Councilor Whiting.
Aye.
Councilor Lehman.
Negative.
Mr. Mars. Excuse me.
Aye.
Mayor Mars.
Motion passes 4-1. Thank you very much. Next up, 9B2, amend the Canterbury Development TIF District, putting in the other parcels into the district. This was run through our EDA as well.
Mayor Mars, I make a motion to approve modification to tax increment financing plan for tax increment financing district number 18.
Mayor Mars, Contreras, second.
I have a motion by Brennan and a second by Contreras.
Mr. Mayor,
Our city
I'm not-
attorney, Jim?
I didn't hear in the motion that it would also adopt the resolution 2020-056, so that
Thank
should
you.
be. as
We'll
part
take
of
a step back. Counselor Brennan, you made the motion. Can
I'll
you,
read it. I make a motion to adopt resolution number R 2020-056, approving a modification to tax increment financing plan for the tax increment financing district number 18.
thank you. And the
I'll
second
second it.
was Counselor Contreras. Is that acceptable to the second?
Yes, I second it.
A more fuller read of the policy and action requested. So then, motion on the table in a second, further discussion. Discussion by voice vote. Mr. Reynolds.
Counselor Brennan.
Aye.
Counselor Contreras.
Aye.
Counselor Whiting.
Aye.
Counselor Lehman.
Negative.
Mayor Mars.
Aye. Motion passes 4-1. Thank you very much. Moving ahead to 9B3, amend the contract for the private development with Canterbury Commons / Canterbury Park. This too went through our EDA. And it's exactly the
Mars?
same. Counselor Contreras.
I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution number R 2020-057, approving an amendment to the contract for private redevelopment with the Economic Development Authority for the City of Shakopee, Minnesota, Canterbury Development LLC, and Canterbury Park Holding Corporation.
Thank you. And a second by
Brennan.
Counselor Brennan. Further discussion? Discussion by voice vote. Mr. Reynolds.
Counselor Brennan.
Aye.
Counselor Contreras.
Aye.
Counselor Whiting.
Aye.
Counselor Lehman.
Negative.
And Mayor Mars.
Aye. This motion passes 4-1. Thank you very much. Moving ahead then to 10A, which is the city bill list for our review. And if there would be no further questions on that, we would move ahead then to 10B, which is our liaison and administration report. Counselor Brennan.
Thank you. I had our SPUC meeting yesterday, and there is a 2019 reliability report that's been completed. And if anybody would like a copy of that, please let me know. I can get that to you. SPUC also, the commission also adjourned to go into closed session. And when it came out of closed session, there was a motion to hire an attorney to investigate certain things that have occurred. I and Commissioner Matthew Mayer are researching attorneys that will come in and do an investigation for us. And the SPUC will be meeting again on Thursday at 5 o'clock for an open meeting, special meeting. That's all.
Okay. Is that it?
That's all.
Thank you very much. Counselor Lehman.
My liaisonships have not met because of the COVID-19.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Whiting. Did we lose Counselor Whiting? All right, we'll come back. Counselor Contreras?
Thank you, Mayor. For the school, they're on their third week of distant learning, which is of course new to everybody. Superintendent Redmond is proud of the work of our 1,400 employees and what they have accomplished in less than a month. Also, the schools have served over 30,000 meals to children of our community. It's a lot of work, but they're keeping, but they keep working hard and keep looking to see how they can do things better every day. With the SDA also working really hard in these hard times. They're working with partners, with different partners, with like, for example, the CAP agency, SEC and Harvest, and many other organizations to continue to provide that group, the COVID-19 group, to continue continue doing the food drive, for the community. This weekend, they served 375 families, a total of 1,875 individuals. So everybody is working really hard right now in these difficult moments. Great work.
Thank you.
That's it. You're welcome.
Did Counselor Whiting make it back? Doesn't look like it. We'll come back to him if he comes back on. For my report, I have a couple items that I've been out and about in the community at a safe distance out in our parks. I think for most people, they are following the guidelines at distancing. I see a lot of our community coming together and really coming together. The COVID help group that's putting on those, giving food away on the weekends. I think they're 3 weekends, almost close to 1,000 people. They've really stepped it up. It's amazing to see the outpouring of contributions, people that want to help, and then the positive impact that is being made in our community is unbelievable. Our downtown restaurants and businesses are coming together. They're making creative videos. They're helping with donating portions of their sales and tips to bartenders, hair salons. It's amazing how strong our community is to come together. I think that is phenomenal, and we have some more time to go here. I know everybody is anxious to move forward, but I look at it as more of a long-term thing. If we need to do it right, and we need to do it right the first time so we don't have to do it again. And certainly if we've been working for home or gathering at home for 30 days, even if it went 60 days, in the big picture of our go-go busy lives over 20, 30, 40 years, I think we could hunker down for 30 to 60 days to make our community and the world a better place. So that's kind of my comment on that. I do have some information that our Park and Rec Department, for the most part, their facilities are shut, but they are reaching out to our community. They're on their Facebook page and Instagram. They're having a lot of activities, and maybe your kids want to be involved, families. Today actually is Trivia Tuesday. And the question is, for today is, from June, speaking of, I brought up earlier, Earth Day, 50-year anniversary tomorrow. From June 2016 to June 2019, how many trees has the city of Shakopee planted? Couple choices, 540, 673, 985, and 1,041. And I'm pleased to announce that the answer is D. The city of Shakopee in the last 3 years has planted over 1,000 trees in our community. Speaking of trees, if you would like to buy a tree and plant your own tree, there are city tree sales still going on, and you can find the link to the Arbor Day tree sales on the city website. or it's actually attached to today's answer on the trivia question. Those orders need to be in by April 24th at noon. Please do check out Earth Day tomorrow, 50th anniversary, and on our Facebook page for Park and Rec. A lot of activities and history, fun things for all ages and abilities from your Park and Rec staff. So I thought that was a nice thing to get people engaged. And that is my report.
Councilor Whiting's back.
And Councilor Whiting, you're back.
I'm back.
You didn't get a haircut, but you're back.
I still need a haircut, but I didn't.
We would love to
drop
hear your liaison report.
Mr. Mayor, I have nothing to report, but as far as the liaison, but I do want to mention the Shakopee Loaves and Fishes site is still open if people are in need of a meal. They're serving from the St. John's Lutheran Church on 8th and Spencer, or 8th and Fuller, I believe it is. And you can get a meal at 5:30 p.m. I think they serve till about 6:30. That's available for anybody with no questions asked. That's all I have.
Thank you very much and welcome back. Next up, our administration report, Mr. Reynolds.
Nothing from administration, sir.
Okay, thank you. Item number 11, other business. Is there any other business before this council? Councilor
I have one,
Lehman.
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Matt Lehman. A perception of a conflict of interest when somebody is working legal issue on both, making strategy on both sides. I view that as a conflict.
You just want to make that comment, or?
Well, it's happening, so I
Okay.
view it as a conflict.
Mr. Thompson, would you like to address that, please?
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. I think I know what the question refers to, but if it refers to a council member sitting on the Shakopee Public Utilities Commission, those are two separate roles, and the commissioner, even though they're a council member, has the right and obligation to consider all matters that are before that board. And if there is confidential information shared with that commissioner who also is on the council, the commissioner needs to keep that information as confidential as all other commission members. So in that sense, there is no conflict of interest.
Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Lehman?
Mr. Thompson, have you ever represented both sides of litigation?
Mr. Mayor, member of council, no, but that's not the issue here. There haven't been any closed sessions to discuss litigation by the city council.
There has been by this city council. We took a strategy and we talked specifically about issues pertaining to the utility prior to us having somebody on the utility. So if the utility was to take up legal matters pertaining to what the city discussed and strategized, now that person that we appointed to the utility would be strategizing and taking up legal issues against the city.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, you have to be careful here. If there was a meeting that was scheduled to be closed to discuss litigation matters, that's a different issue and would need to be addressed at that time. But right now, there are none.
Okay.
And I think there were allegations. There is no litigation going on, Councilor Lehman. And she acts to protect the utility organization. I think we have precedent that we've had sitting council members on that board in the past on at least 2 other occasions. in the
And
past
that's-
many, many years.
That's not my question or concern. My question and concern is specifically with legal issues between the city and the utility, having a person working on both sides. That to me is a conflict on legal issues, not necessarily the day-to-day operations.
Okay, well, I think we've heard from our city attorney that it represents no conflict of interest
Yes.
in regard to this matter. Do you have more comments or any other business before
sir.
us? Seeing none then, we would move ahead to item number 12, adjournment.
Mayor, I make a
Counselor-
motion to adjourn to Tuesday, May 5th, 2020 at 7:00 PM.
Okay, Counselor Lehman?
Second.
I have a motion to adjourn to Tuesday, May 5th, 2020 at 7 PM by Counselor Brennan, second by Counselor Lehman. Further discussion? 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 All in favors or by roll call?
Counselor Brennan,
Aye.
Counselor Contreras,
Aye.
Counselor Whiting,
Aye.
Counselor Lehman,
Aye.
and Mayor Mars.
Aye. Thank you all. Be safe, be kind. We are adjourned at 8:14.
Take care.
Bye.